I'm Heather Getter. You're Ron Price, and we are talking about our book, Touching Heaven, Walking Earth. We are talking about week 4, the theme, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Now, different translations use different words. Debts, sins, what's the third one?
Trespasses.
Trespasses. Which one means the most to you?
Sins. Because I think, first of all, this is amazing because Jesus, after he teaches the prayer, he said, if you forgive those who sin against you, my Father will forgive you. But if you don't forgive those who sin against you, this is a little bit, a lot of us don't want to believe this. We want to think, no, I'm forgiven.
Yep.
And
unconditionally.
Yeah, but he's actually saying, this is a relationship. Relationship has responsibilities in it. So I'm expecting this from you. And this is maybe one of the hardest parts because there is something in us that cries out for justice. And when we feel abused or we feel that somebody's been unfair to us or to those people that we love or unfair to what we believe in, there's something in us that cries out for justice. And as I meditated on this, what I concluded was, in the worst way, I want to be a judge. And God tells me, it's not your job. It's my job. So I rewrote this prayer for myself. And the way I wrote it is, because you've forgiven me of such grievous thoughts and actions against you. I'll come back to that in a moment. I'm not going to hold other people's thoughts or actions against them or insist on payback because of their selfishness, even when they've hurt me or those I love. I choose to forgive them as an act of obedience toward you because I know I get something out of it. And I choose to align with your love toward them as an act of my will. So first of all, you've forgiven me such grievous thoughts and actions against you. One of the things I believe that happens is that the closer we get to God, the more we recognize our own shortcomings and our need for forgiveness. So a lot of times we think, well, I haven't murdered anybody, I haven't stolen it. But the reality is, Jesus said, if you call your brother a fool, in your heart, it's like you've committed murder. And so he said the standard that is the righteousness of God is really beyond anything that we can reach.
Yep. Absolutely.
Apart from his life in us.
He's also evened out all the types of sin, right? Like there's not any worse. It all separates us from God.
Yeah. So that becomes the impetus or the power for me to say, okay, I'm going to let other people off the hook. Of course, Jesus told this in parables. I had my own little parable as I meditated on it. It was that I was called into court because of my guilt, because of my shortcomings. And when I got to court, I found out that my defense attorney was Jesus. And that when he stood before the judge, he said, I've already paid the penalty for this crime, so there's no double jeopardy. And so I left the court, and then I ran into somebody that I have a grudge against, and I said, I'm taking you to court. And I get to court, and I find out their defense attorney is Jesus. I'm thinking, how do I handle this now? He got me off the hook. How do I demand that he not let them off the hook?
Yep.
And as I pondered this, it's not really what we would call sloppy grace, but it's that when somebody has asked for God's forgiveness through what Jesus did on the cross, I don't have any claim anymore toward them. And if they haven't accepted that, I'm still not the judge. That's up to God to take care of, not me.
Yeah. I had a personal story that happened. I was 17 and was hurt by somebody in leadership in my life. And it was painful. And, at 17, you don't quite have the life experience to, handle it. And I went off to just pray about it, pour my heart out to the Lord. And he took the opportunity to talk to me about forgiveness. Because it isn't just about our own sins. It's also about when people hurt us.
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of this two-sided thing. And I just clearly heard God say, forgive them. And in my 17-year-old self, I was like, okay, they're forgiven. But it didn't feel like it. I didn't go there emotionally. And so finally, after not having forgiven them and holding on to it for a while later, I finally came back to the Lord and I reworded forgive. Like you reword these lines. I said, I am no longer going to make them try to feel the way that they made me feel.
Mm.
And that was what released. That's what forgive. So I no longer am trying to hurt them the way that they hurt me. Never mind that we all have hurts and we all hurt each other.
Yeah.
It's understanding that it's not on you. You're not the judge. You're not the one that's going to dole out the punishment. Even if you want to not talk to them or you want to, cut them off from your life or whatever it is. It's like you don't have that place of judge. You need to not try to hurt them the way that they hurt you.
Yeah. There are two things that really strike me about that. I want to talk about reconciliation versus forgiveness in a moment. But I think we tend to think of forgiveness as a one-time decision.
Mm-hmm.
And Peter asked Jesus, how often do I forgive him? And he said 7 times 70. And it wasn't necessarily just because the person sins 70 times. It's because sometimes I can't forgive in one action. It takes repetition.
Yep.
So the people that I've struggled with in my life, in my prayer, I say, I forgive so-and-so, and finish that prayer. And I pray it out loud. And I say, I'm going to do it every day until in my heart I know that I have released any claim on them, any cry for justice, and that I recognize that if that ever is going to come, it's going to be because it's God's job, not mine.
Yep.
And I will rejoice if I find out that it didn't come because they accepted Jesus' love.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean, to forgive somebody doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be reconciled.
No, that's where God asks us to be innocent as doves, but wise as serpents.
Yeah. How have you handled that? Have you had situations where you could forgive somebody, but there really wasn't reconciliation?
Oh, yeah. I have fairly high boundaries just in general. And if, releasing them from the hurt that they caused me or the desire to be hurt and trusting that God will judge them, whether it's on earth or in heaven, I then can be, you know what? They're left to God.
Yeah.
And I am not going to put myself in a position to be under that again. Does that make sense?
It does.
It's an easier position than if it were like my husband.
Yeah.
Because that is a continual relationship that has to be worked out.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's boundaries of oh, you know what? That is not a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
So I'm going to walk away from it.
Right.
And I'm not going to subject myself to being hurt again.
Yeah. I think that's a good example of what I'm talking about. But sometimes people do want reconciliation.
Yeah.
And I think of reconciliation as being bidirectional. It's there's an obligation on both sides for there to be reconciliation that can involve apology and acknowledging wrong. And sometimes it might include restitution as well. And that's a journey one step at a time, because in reconciliation, you have to rebuild trust that was lost.
There has to be lots of grace.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to use another word, the word mercy.
Yeah.
Because for me, one of the scriptures that's very meaningful to me in my own walk with God is his mercies are new every morning. It means he recognizes that we need a spiritual shower. Mercy, I define, I don't know if it's theologically pure, somebody will probably correct me. It's being given blessings that we didn't earn, that we don't deserve. And not being given the judgment that we do deserve. There's a theory in theology called common grace, which is the idea that God is good to everybody, regardless of whether they know him or seek him or believe in him. So it says he reigns on the just and the unjust. So I'm thinking of that as getting blessings that we didn't earn.
Yeah.
We don't deserve.
Yep.
But not being. So I think, okay, if that's what I need every morning, can I extend that to the people around me? And I can, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I have the same level of trust.
Yeah.
and that I keep maintaining. There's still a difference between that. One last thing before we finish this long segment. Sometimes God does call us to judge.
Mm.
Jesus said, judge righteous judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see a lot of scriptures in the Old Testament about judging, but it's actually a responsibility that God gives. And he tells us we better do it according to his character and his standards, not for selfish gain or for personal offense.
Well, and we're also not supposed to dole out the punishment.
Yeah. Yeah.
So part of the judging that he asks us to do, I call critically thinking. Because it's like, okay, their actions, according to scripture, we're allowed to look at that and say, you know what, those actions are not righteous. That is not how they should act. But we're not supposed to be the one that then sends them to hell
Yes.
or makes them have the consequences from their own actions.
Yeah, and we have to align with what God's standard and his will is. You know, we live in the United States. There are tens of thousands of judges across this country. My question is, do they recognize that ultimately they're accountable to God for how they judge?
My husband would say that they are accountable, whether they recognize it or not.
Yeah, it's a good statement. So forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors.